Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Sophia Ahrens, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the GBBC Virtual Members Forum. This is a bi-weekly webinar we host showcasing the innovative work of our members around the world. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Gilad Eisenberger, co-founder and CTO of Valid Network, for a presentation on Valid Network's approach to security and assurance for blockchain applications, and also lessons learned and the future state when discussing blockchain security. Just briefly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Gilad. He is a 14-year veteran of the technology sector. Using his expertise in the field, he has brought pioneering technology to large and small companies around the world, and is most recently the co-founder and CTO of Valid Network. Gilad is bringing safety and security to the world of blockchain applications and distributed technologies, which we'll hear more about today. For all of you joining us live, we welcome your questions any point during Gilad's presentation. So please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll take them after. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll hand things over to you now.
Thank you, Sophia. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start the presentation a bit about me. We started with the bio, but just to talk about some of my background. I've been doing cybersecurity most of my professional life. I've done enterprise security, which later became cloud security at Microsoft. And I've been spending the past few years doing research into blockchain security, investigating various security vulnerabilities and attacks in that industry. And part of that work has been done as part of Valid Network. I'll also say a bit about Valid Network, where we provide security solutions for blockchain technologies or for organizations that are utilizing or depend on blockchain in any way. We do work on public and private blockchain networks, do static analysis, automated auditing, and also runtime monitoring and forensics for attacks and incidents that occur. From here, I'd like to move on to the presentation and talk about sharing some of the observation my team and I have reached over the past few years, diving into the past security incidents in blockchain, the past security challenges, into where we are today, and then move on into what we look at for the future in terms of security for blockchain, for the technology, for the ecosystem, and so on. And before the talk itself will focus a lot about challenges and the reason why not to use blockchain. And I want to start the talk with talking about what are the reasons to use blockchain. And I'm sure most of the audience here is aware of the advantages of blockchain in terms of reduced costs, simplifying the auditing and providing visibility to all, and improving trust in locations where trust doesn't necessarily exist, and basically enabling communications and cooperation between entities that don't normally trust one another. During the talk, I'll be going back and forth between public blockchain and private blockchain. I'll try and focus in things that are more relevant to the public or more relevant to the private when that happens, but it'll be a bit of a mixed content between the two. And so we talked about why to use blockchain, and basically starting to talk about blockchain security would naturally start with the challenges that blockchain brings, especially in that area. And these are kind of known challenges that exist with any new technology that's being adopted: complex unmonitored transactions, code vulnerabilities that are often undetected and take a while to be identified and fixed, compliance and regulation needs, uncertainties, expectations about new regulation that is expected to come in the future, and the lack of talent. So it's a new technology. There isn't a lot of experienced people that have experience with the technology and can fill the roles that are necessary to help that technology grow. And these are challenges that are, as I mentioned, general and apply to most new technologies in one way or another. I think blockchain has some additional, more specific challenges that relate to the decisions or the idea behind blockchain. And the first of those is around visibility. So the idea in blockchain is providing an open and visible communication consensus model, an open network for participants to view into and participate in. And that brings with it security challenges where attackers have the same level of visibility, and attacks that have been successful are visible to everyone. So it's more difficult for organizations to quiet down incidents that occurred or tone them down or limit their impact. Everyone can see everything and know what happened. The second aspect is immutability. I'm sure anyone dealing with blockchain is aware of the challenges that immutability brings in terms of recovering from attacks, fixing corruptions that might occur and things like that are much more difficult to do on the blockchain and in some cases even impossible. And lastly, the fact that the system is decentralized brings a unique challenge where in traditional cybersecurity, they say that the best way to protect yourself is to turn off the computer, or the only way to have a secure system is to turn it off. In a decentralized world, you can shut down your servers, you can protect them as much as you want, but since the network is decentralized, you have no control over what happens at that network. You're still exposed to attacks, your assets are still exposed to attacks. There's no way to take them offline, disconnect them from the network, and make them immune in any way. And these challenges are, in my eyes, more unique to blockchain and specific because of kind of the ideas and the direction that blockchain is trying to pull into. And we can see these challenges coming in when we start looking at a very short part of the various security incidents that occurred over the past years. I don't think we need to go over the list. It's, again, a very partial list. A lot of security events, a lot of funds impacted. And security incidents are nothing new in the blockchain world, but there is still a general concept that the blockchain itself is secure by nature, or that it is secure, and that there's no real need for security. Diving into a specific past attack and looking at its impact, we can see pricing history for, in this case, Bitcoin and Ethereum. And this is around the time of the parity wallet freeze in 2017, November 2017. And what's interesting in these graphs is that we can see a significant impact right around the middle, around November 8th, 9th, 10th, where actually the Bitcoin price is taking a significant dive, and that's exactly the dates where the attack was acknowledged by parity and got a lot of public attention and focus, eventually leading to 300 or so million dollars worth of Ether that were locked in wallets and are still locked there. And the interesting aspect that I'm trying to show in this chart is that the impact of a security attack impacts more than just the funds that were locked or that specific network, that specific coin or cryptocurrency. It has a wider effect where it impacts the industry, the network, the technology, and the perception of it. And we can see that impact through various list of attacks and incidents that happened throughout those years, and seeing their significant impact from blockchain-wide impacts. For example, the Bitcoin price we saw as a result of an incident on a completely different network, or a transaction fee hiking that happens every now and then and impacts basically the whole blockchain. We can also see attacks naturally that affect an exchange in various levels. It could be a localized impact. It could lead to a complete closure of that exchange or that entity, that organization. impact on decentralized applications in various ways, and attacks from small to large, impacting the application, its functionality, and in many cases, even the reputation of that application, and effect on specific wallets, specific accounts, even groups of wallets, such as in the parity freeze itself. And this impact is significant, and looking at data collected by Slow Hacked, which maintain a good database of security incidents that occurred over the past several years that they've been tracking, we can see a $14 billion impact in total on all of those attacks. And that's a significant impact. It's focused on the direct impact and not necessarily the reputation impact and things like that are much more difficult to measure. But it shows that this is a big problem. It's happening constantly throughout all the blockchain networks. Every day, almost, we can hear of a new attack. Looking at the same data, we can see that an average attack has an impact of $38 million. That might sound low, that might sound high, but it's actually a very high number when you compare it to other industry standards around costs of attacks for ransomware, for example, which are significantly lower at the 5 times less or so for an average attack. So these incidents have a significant impact, financial, and have been carried out, with us as a fact of life throughout blockchain network. Most of the attacks have been public, especially those that we know about, mostly thanks to the high visibility of blockchain network that allows us to view that data and understand what happened in the past. And this large number is a global problem. With blockchain being a technology designed to remove boundaries and encourage cooperation and openness between entities. It's a global movement. There's blockchain development throughout the world, including developing countries that are normally slower to adopt new technologies. And the impact of these attacks has a global impact as well. Funds and assets are not localized to a specific region. The networks themselves are global, cross-country, especially the public open ones. So this is a global problem that needs to be addressed by more than just one entity or every entity attempting to protect itself. And that slide kind of brought us in from talking about the past events and the past incidents that we saw in various blockchain attacks into where are we today, and what challenges does blockchain users of blockchains, or organizations that are using blockchains, the industry and the ecosystem itself, what are the challenges faced by the technology today in the security space? So one of the main challenges we see today is the autonomousness of attacks, where today they're mostly semi-autonomous in the sense that some are triggered and some are autonomous. So these are basically attacks where an attacker, a malicious entity, would release some kind of scanner that attempts to identify a situation that can be exploited, in many cases based on historical knowledge or an attack that happened in the past, and then just attempts to locate a contract or an asset that's vulnerable to that same type of attack and immediately execute that. We can see that becoming a more significant trend where attacks that have been executed are quickly re-executed in a copycat-like attack. We can look at the lend.me attack, where there were several attacks using the exact same technique day after day. Either the same entity just looking for more targets as they find them, or other entities that are learning from that attack and then copying it and performing the same attack against different assets. And this, in a way, utilizes the visibility of the blockchain, and leads us into the second significant challenge today, which is complex targeted attacks. The blockchain's visibility allows attackers to do a lot of reconnaissance work before attempting to execute an attack, and that makes it easier to perform complex attacks. It gives the attackers more confidence in the success of the attacks before they're executed. It's very easy to evaluate what the outcome of the attack is to verify that everything works correctly. It even applies to the most basic of things, such as private key theft. So an attacker that gains a private key of an account can immediately check the balance of that account and determine whether it's worth it to extract those funds and reveal possibly the knowledge of that private key. Whereas an attacker that would get a user's bank password, for example, would need to log into the bank and see what the balance of the account is. There's no external way to look at the balance of the account without actually using that password. Now, if that's either a honeypot where the bank is tracking that or would somehow identify that behavior as anomalous, the attacker would expose it himself only to find out whether the attack is worth it or not. So additional visibility allows attackers to plan out the attack ahead of time, be aware of nearly all the security mechanisms that exist, and know that the attack is going to be successful before it's executed. And another challenge we see is the need for organizations to react quickly to attacks. And we can mostly see that gap by looking at the more recent attacks where organizations have actually been able to react more quickly. And we can see that there is the possibility to either recover or limit the impact of attacks by reacting quickly to them, freezing funds, blacklisting accounts, and doing whatever is necessary to either destroy the stolen funds or somehow recover them. And organizations today have a challenge of needing to be prepared to react quickly, to have monitoring in place to be aware of an attack, and then have a plan in place to execute on that plan and react quickly to an attack. And these first three have been mostly public blockchain challenges. And the next two are more of the private area. Private blockchains today mostly rely on isolation as a means of protection. They're private networks that have a very limited number of members in them and highly restrict the parties that are involved, the entities that have access to the network, and that provides a layer of security by not allowing attackers to reach that network. While that works today, I see it as a challenge because effectively that's the opposite of what blockchain is attempting to do. Blockchain is about the opposite of isolation. It's about connecting systems between entities that don't trust one another, and establishing an ecosystem or a system of trade or other shared data system that allows communication between entities that don't really know how to communicate without exposing themselves to security issues. So while that works today, as we move from POC to production, and as these systems take a more substantial place in world trading and world finance and take a real place, they'll be more and more exposed to actual attacks and actual attempts to attack those systems. And another aspect of moving from POC to production is that while systems are in a POC level, there's very little motivation to attack them. They usually don't really hold any significant real funds. Even if so, they're usually backed by other systems that are tracking their behavior and are used as the production system. And as blockchain systems will move from a POC level to a production level, attackers become more motivated to actually carry out an attack. An attacker today, even if he would be aware of an attack that could be executed against a private blockchain network that's in a POC level today, there would be no motivation to execute that attack and reveal the knowledge of that possible attack, as opposed to waiting until that system is in production and possibly either causing damages or potentially stealing funds or any other damage that that attack might expose. And we talked about challenges. I'd like to talk a bit about where the solutions are today, or where security is today. And I see three areas where that is. It's around heavy auditing, and that auditing goes hand in hand with security experience, which are the first two security solutions. Systems today are very widely checked and verified for issues, and those checks are based on past experience of attacks, of vulnerabilities, of mistakes that were made when either writing those systems or deploying them or using them. And that allows better security overall. You can audit your system and get protection from most known attacks. It's of course not foolproof, but it provides a good security. And that same security experience has left us with asset systems that are battle tested or battle hardened. There are accounts today that hold billions of dollars of bounties, where if you could find a security vulnerability, you could potentially escape with that level of bounty, hundreds of millions, even $1 billion. So that's a large bounty. Currently, it's not being exploited. So that would indicate that there are no real known attacks there. It's unlikely someone's waiting for the opportunity for that bounty to be bigger and to cause more impact with that attack. And the last thing we see in security today as a solution is faster reaction times. Especially during the second half of 2020, we saw organizations that were attacked starting to react quickly and move quickly to freeze funds, blacklist addresses, suspend trading in any way they can to limit the impact of potential attacks. And that has proven effective. So they've been able to reduce the impact, to recover some of the funds, most of the funds in some cases, and overall limit the level of impact of an attack that's relatively new. While in the old days, they would move to a hard fork to recover the funds, but today there are other mechanisms in place. It's true that these mechanisms require preparation ahead of time. You need to have the mechanisms in place to either destroy the funds, prevent them from being transferred, relationships with other entities such as exchanges to help you recover those funds or take whatever actions you need. And as I mentioned earlier, you need to have both the monitoring to detect the issue quickly and the plan in place to react quickly to that attack and perform the actions necessary to reduce the impact. And what we are seeing is that when that's done correctly, that can have a significant impact on the impact level of the attack. So it can be successful. And we talked a bit about where we are today, and leading us into the final aspect of where do we think we're going to tomorrow. And this slide actually shows areas that are challenges and opportunities or solutions as well, together. So with the autonomous capabilities that we discussed that are starting to emerge for attacks, these same autonomous capabilities can be used for by white hat hackers to exploit the attack and protect the funds, capture them, return them to their respected owners. And even to just monitor and identify the vulnerability and let the required parties know that they have this issue that could be exploited and help them act quickly to fix the issue. So definitely, if we look at what to expect tomorrow or in the upcoming years, an increase of autonomous capabilities is definitely to be expected, both by attackers and by entities trying to protect themselves. Automated scanning, detection of attacks, automatic reaction possibly to certain events that happen. These are signs of maturity that are likely to emerge. The technology certainly allows autonomous operation here, and it's a matter of getting to where we know these systems, we can prove that they work effectively, attackers can prove that they work effectively as well, and generally increase the maturity of all the autonomous capabilities. And the second area is around maturity of attacks and defenses. Some of the attacks until now have been, in some cases, very naive, especially in the early days. We can see how the maturity is increasing and the complexity of attacks is increasing. And we can expect that maturity to continue. We'd expect more and more complex attacks and assets or organizations that are more and more protected and more prepared for these attacks. And it's the usual cycle of cat and mouse, where one side can advance and find something new, and the other reacts by improving either the attack or defense in return. The third thing we'd expect to see is a much more established recovery process. These are to be expected to where and the impact of the attack can be minimized and established ahead of time. That could allow a lot of the uncertainty around attacks to be reduced. If you can know that you'll be able to limit the impact of an attack, the risk is reduced somewhat, the reputation impact is significantly reduced when there is good recovery in place. And that can increase confidence and make attacks less worthwhile, especially against entities that are well prepared. So definitely an area that will improve in the future, and it's effectively cost effective for these organizations to set in place these recovery mechanisms. The last item is a bit technological, but these are I'll explain what I mean by non-front-runnable transactions. Currently, transactions have a time period on the blockchain where they're visible to everyone before they're committed to the ledger and effectively finalized. And that time frame allows an attacker or another entity to front-run those transactions by passing them in line and then submitting a transaction ahead of them that's based on the knowledge of what the other entity is attempting to do. And there are technological solutions that either prevent this or significantly limit the amount of the size of opportunity someone has to front-run a transaction. These could be in different consensus mechanisms or other technological implementations that allow entities to protect themselves from aspects of the blockchain that are considered an inherent part of it. So visibility into transactions has often been a cornerstone of blockchain, and non-front-runnable transactions, for example, allows limiting the impact of that visibility on potential users of the blockchain to protect themselves from front-running. And this trend is likely to expand to additional aspects. If we look at privacy-enabled blockchains, they offer somewhat of the same same idea of protection, of using a new technology to slightly alter the concept of blockchain and potentially limit some of the downsides or some of the potential limitations that exist in the idea of the technology. And having talked about the past and the future, a nice George Orwell quote. This one is actually from the Command and Conquer game. It's slightly modified. And I think this quote has a nice double meaning in the world of blockchain. It's originally from the 1984 book. But it's interesting because in blockchain, basically miners receive the rewards for their participation in the blockchain. And these rewards, in addition to receiving the rewards, they get to decide which blocks to apply next. So effectively, they can command the future. And then these same miners are effectively the entities that provide the safety in terms of assets. So by continuing to mine blocks, the mining is what guarantees the value of the assets that are stored in the blockchain. It's effectively what prevents others from manipulating that data and performing various attacks on it. But these same miners, when they add blocks and by controlling the mining power, they also have the ability to decide on hard forks, which is effectively an attempt to modify the past and to alter it. So I think that brings in a nice meaning into this sentence with the world of blockchain and the impact that mining organizations have on how things are executed and what they modify in the past. And this also brings us into a discussion of how we bring conventional security, the mindset of the past, into the technology of the future. And how do we apply the same concepts we have for traditional, conventional security to a new world of decentralized and blockchain-based systems. That's all I had. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you so much, Gilad. We've received a number of questions, and I'd actually like to start. I'm going to group some of these together. So I think a good place to start is if you could walk us through Valid Network's engagement with an enterprise, and then the follow-up question, do you typically start with an audit?
Right. Good question. So we provide an automated system. We don't usually start with a manual audit. We instead apply the application's either source code or binary to our system and perform an automated scan of that system for vulnerabilities. This provides a quick assessment of what type of issues might exist in the application, which aspects are more risky or less risky, and what are the approaches to protect that application. Once we adapt the code, either the source code or the binary, we can then track that the development of that code as it progresses, and as issues in that contract are fixed and changes are made to the code, we can rescan it and re-verify and ensure that the fixes are correct and they indeed fix the issue. And then finally, once the system is ready to be deployed, most likely to a POC environment, we can provide runtime monitoring and inspection of transactions and activity that happen on the network. And finally, forensics capabilities to dive into specific transactions or incidents that occurred on the network, understand exactly what happened, how it happened, and how to potentially prevent it in the future.
Thank you. And also to the folks who were asking, we will certainly provide links to Valid Network's website, so you can even request a demo online as well if you're curious to learn more. Somebody says, thank you. This is a very important topic. Regarding parity wallet lockup, this was really a coding loophole/error. In that case, do you consider that a security hack? If some of the issues are due to coding error, are they in fact hacks?
Good question. A bit of a debate. Specifically, the parity hack was a deployment issue. So they were fixing a previous security issue that they had with the contract, and they didn't initialize it. That left a backdoor open. And that itself is a security issue. The discussion on whether the attacker in this case, or victim, but whoever invoked that specific backdoor and effectively, either mistakenly or purposefully, locked all those wallets, that's a different discussion. I don't think there's a doubt that there was a security issue, in the sense that had anyone attempted or had an interest in performing a malicious action and locking those contracts, he would have been able to. So I definitely see that as a security issue. I'm not certain that this was an intentional attack, but it may have been an accidental attack. The impact has definitely been significant, and due to what I would only describe as a security error. It may have been a deployment issue, but it was a deployment issue that caused the security problem.
Absolutely. Somebody also asks, do you work with governments?
That's a good question. We work with some governments, especially around financial regulation and those kinds of aspects.
And this question actually relating to government use of blockchain. So they ask, what are your thoughts on Estonia's use of blockchain for digital ID? Is it secure and effective? And do you think it is a model for other countries?
That's a good question. I'm not too familiar with their solution. I'd love to continue discussing it over email. I don't have an answer offhand.
Absolutely, that's fair. Okay, as we're talking about governments and you mentioned regulation a little bit, someone asked, what role do standards and regulations play in encouraging adoption? I think you did talk about this in your presentation, but also can technical standards also improve security?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the technical standards area, the standards are still very non-technical. So they're very generalized. They're more of guidelines. It's very difficult to measure your meeting of those standards. Some of them are easier to measure, but some are quite difficult to measure objectively. And that limits your ability to create automated tools that work as part of the development process to verify that you're meeting the technical standards that you set for yourself. And I certainly think as time progresses, those technical standards will mature into a much more structured structure, which will allow easier measurement of whether or not you meet your technical specifications, where the issues are, what changes need to be made to meet those, and that will significantly reduce the risk of attacks and help organizations protect themselves. So I definitely think it's important, expect it to mature in the future.
Absolutely, that's definitely a focus of the GBBC as well. Another question here. What do you think about crypto exchanges and the level of security measures they have in place? Are they doing enough?
So a good question as well. I definitely think crypto exchanges are, especially, well, I think we need to separate that into the centralized ones and the decentralized ones. Definitely the centralized ones definitely have high security standards, and they have the added protection of being in some ways isolated, hidden from the view, and some security by obscurity, which is not a solution, but it certainly helps. And it's difficult to assess exactly how many attacks they faced and what the impact was. There's not too much data. They have very much control of what they expose and what they don't. But that system seems to be working well. For the decentralized exchanges, there have definitely been issues with some of the contracts there. We have a good research paper coming out on 2020 and all of the impacts. I definitely think there's more to be done. As I mentioned in my slides, I don't see this as a problem that can be solved by a specific entity. I see this as a global problem, as an ecosystem problem that we need to work to solve together through the concept of power blockchain, which is visibility and openness, and certainly by learning from past mistakes, building up the mechanisms to ensure we don't make those mistakes again, and effectively reaching that.
I think that speaks to Valid Network's approach to security and assurance on the whole. Somebody else asked if you're aware of any data regarding the correlation of attacks in COVID. Did perhaps the number of attacks go up during the sort of lockdown period we've been in?
So there certainly has been a rise in the number of attacks in 2020. The impact varies significantly. It was higher than 2019, so it's on the rise. There were some significant attacks in 2017, 2018, where the damages were very large. I think the data set is still a bit small to estimate, especially to correlate that to the effects of COVID. I think it's been an exciting year or two in the blockchain industry in many ways. And so there have been shifts in attacks. I think they're mostly due to the shift in popularity of DeFi, blockchain, crypto, and COVID had an impact, but I don't think that's significant.
Sure. Somebody else also asks if you could break down kind of the differences between traditional IT security and blockchain security. How do they differ and how are they similar?
Very good question. So I do think blockchain security is still very immature. In many ways, there's not much security in place for blockchain. There are few solutions. There's little integration into the rest of the organization. Blockchain security solutions, especially in private enterprise type deployments, are very limited and scoped to the blockchain itself. They don't connect to other assets in the organizations. They don't share data about other attacks and possibly cross-system attacks or cross-system impacts. So I think in the organization, in the enterprise, blockchain security is very immature and very at its early infancy. And it's expected to grow and mature and connect with the rest of the organization and the rest of the security organization within the enterprise. Regarding public blockchain, crypto, I think it's a completely different world. The concepts that apply to traditional cybersecurity are challenged by blockchains, public blockchains, complete shift of concepts and differences. It's very difficult to protect yourself. So all of the traditional concepts of protection, of having a firewall or a mechanism in place to prevent an attack, to filter transactions, to filter data, they don't really apply to a public blockchain. And that requires a larger focus on auditing, on identification of vulnerabilities beforehand. And that challenges some of the concepts that are traditional in traditional security, cybersecurity, where vulnerabilities are fine. If you have a firewall that's protecting from it, you're still protected. So definitely vulnerability detection, auditing haven't had that significant a place in traditional cybersecurity as they should in blockchain, most likely.
Just as we're talking about, well, even future threats, somebody asked, do you think quantum computing poses a real threat to blockchain security?
That's a very good question. So definitely there are risks around encryption, hashing. I think those can be solved by technological quantum-proof algorithms, and they'll require an evolution, but I don't see that as a significant risk. Definitely the increase of compute power would help at the maturity of attacks. The capability to identify vulnerabilities should be significantly improved with high computation capabilities of quantum computing. And possibly new attacks that we're unaware of today at a conceptual level that might apply to blockchain in that level. It's definitely an interesting topic, and I don't think anyone has answers about where it'll take us.
Well, Gilad, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your informative presentation. I think our audience has really enjoyed picking your brain in the Q&A as well. So just before we close out, I'd like to ask, what are Valid Network's goals for 2021? What's next on the horizon?
So we're continuing to grow, hiring like crazy, and looking to push both in the enterprise, look into more and more complex organizations and offer a better solution there, as well as use the public blockchain to learn to grow and understand what new attacks are coming in and where we're moving to together.
Excellent. Well, we so look forward to watching Valid Network's progression in 2021, and definitely a need for what you're doing in the space. To everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much for your insightful questions. We will share a recording of this presentation on GBBC's YouTube channel and also distribute it to you. You can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for regular updates, and we will also share the links to Valid Network's online presence, as well as information to contact them if you are so inclined. So thank you so much to the team of Valid Network, and especially to Gilad for joining us today. We appreciate it, and take care. Thank you.